Hey everybody, this is Reverend Daniel coming from my parsonage study here with another video looking at great books that are worth reading and worth thinking about. And I hope that you will hit the thumbs up and like this video. I hope you will share it with other people as I try to share resources and ideas to help people grow and think through the issues in our world right now. And I hope you will also comment on it if you want to give me some feedback or pushback or say you love it or think I'm totally off base. That's great. Comment in the comment section below. And hit subscribe to my YouTube channel if you like the kind of content that I'm creating. So, I want to talk about another book today. And today, I'm talking about this book by Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death. And the subtitle is Public Discourse in the Age of Showbiz. And this book originally came out in the early 1980s, I believe, as cable television. We were just on the horizon of that, 1985. And it's come out in, renewed editions. But I think this book, as we have moved kind of from the cable TV age into the internet age and the social media age, is actually all the more relevant now. And the basic ideas he's talking about still apply and are very relevant. So what are the basic ideas he's talking about? What's this book about? Neil Postman talks about how you communicate and how we as a society communicate about our big ideas, our political ideas, our religious ideas. How do we engage in the important communication that we do as communities? And he talks about, there are different ways you can communicate. And they all have kind of different strengths, but also different drawbacks. You could have a face-to-face conversation with a person, and you've got a very great level of engagement, but then after the conversation is over, it's ephemeral, it's gone. That's very different than writing something down in a book and then sending it to somebody and letting them read the book that you have written. That's very different from, say, like in today's culture, sending a text message or an email. They're all different kinds of ways. You could tap out a message on Morse code, with a telegraph. And these are all different ways of communicating, and they all have strengths, and they also have drawbacks. So how are we trying to do our communication in the public square? How are we trying to communicate about the big ideas, the ideas about political policies, but even bigger than that, the ideas about political philosophies, or even bigger than that, the ideas about God or about the ultimate meaning of things? What kinds of ways of communication are we trying to use? And one of the examples he uses in the book, I think is really helpful, is the example of smoke signals. Maybe you've seen some of the old Westerns. I watched a few of them when I was a kid, probably not nearly as many as my dad did when he was a kid. But in a lot of those old Westerns and new ones too, the American Indians, the Native Americans will use smoke signals to communicate. And they'll have the fire with the blanket, and they're sending up puffs of smoke in patterns. And Neil Postman talks about that. You really can communicate that way, and you can communicate pretty quickly at a long distance with somebody who's far away but who's watching the smoke signals. That is a way of communicating. It's a real form of communication. However, it does not lend itself to something like the dialogues of Plato. These deep, reflective, philosophical conversations where there's this back and forth of exploring and refining ideas and then exploring the refined version of the idea and really getting at core philosophical concepts and truth. The dialogues of Plato is simply not the kind of conversation you can have using smoke signals. The communication technology itself is simply not capable of sustaining that level of discourse or that depth of reflection. So he's taking that same idea and saying, okay, what about television? What about the modes of communication that kind of are showbiz, popular entertainment? Because these modes of communication, he's looking around and he's seeing what you see on the TV is impacting what goes on in the public square. It's impacting debates that are happening in, the hallowed halls of our state houses and our Capitol building at the federal level. What happens on TV and the way showbiz works is impacting, he sees, what's going on in our church houses and our cathedrals and our religious gatherings. All of the way that we're trying to communicate is being impacted by the way that the TV tries to communicate. And he sees this as something that really is not a good thing and has some pretty significant drawbacks, because he thinks television and the kind of slick and produced and, most importantly, entertaining, the kind of entertaining communication and programming that gets put out there on TV is not really well suited for all of the important conversations that we as a community and we as a nation or we as a church body need to be having. Some of these things are simply not very entertaining. You know, the Lincoln-Douglas debates look very different from the modern political debate, and I use that term very loosely, that's happening on social media or through Twitter, or even at the debates on the mainstream news networks that they usually have three debates every presidential cycle. But the level of depth you see in the Lincoln-Douglas debates, where they're going on for like 3, 4, 5 hours with these long responses, you know, as to point 12 you mentioned, here's what, you know, and now on our TV debates, it's like you've got 2 minutes to respond, and in our internet debates, or, you know, you've got 140 characters to respond. So the level of depth in our discourse is simply not able to match what we've had in previous forms of communication. When we're trying to use the communication styles and the communication tools of showbiz, we're not going to be able to communicate at that same level of depth, and it's going to, he fears, make our political discourse shallower and make it more about entertainment. And he also fears this will happen with the churches. Remember, he's writing this in 1985. And certainly this has been a lively debate in the churches for decades now. How entertaining should our worship services or gatherings be? If you go to my church, you know I'm not one who wants the service to necessarily be really entertaining. I want it to be engaging. I want it to be uplifting, and even sometimes maybe even unsettling a little bit. But I also want it to be a sacrifice. I want it to be an offering. I don't want it to just be a show that you come to consume. Because that's what we do with showbiz. You know, we are consumers of what the TV puts out there. And that's not the right attitude. Certainly to come into a worship service, I'm here to consume and have my my needs met or my hungers satisfied. And that should not also, he says, be the approach we bring to our political discourse. A political debate should not be like a World Wrestling Federation wrestling match. It's not supposed to be entertaining, and it's not supposed to be amusing, but he fears that is the way everything's going. That and of course now we have, you know, a former reality TV star is our current president, and all of our political discourse, it seems to me, has taken on this kind of Jerry Springer-esque quality. And so I think Neil Postman's predictions and fears have precisely come to pass, and I don't know what's to be done about it at this point. But I do believe this is a very important book if you want to begin to think through some of these issues on a very deep level. This is a great place to start. So if you're concerned about what's going on in our political discourse, our public discourse, our religious discourse, what's going on in the life of our churches, our communities, our body politic, I recommend this one as a great place to start thinking through these things. Amusing Ourselves to Death, Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business by Neil Postman. So I hope you will check that out. And until we connect again, I pray that God keeps you filled to the overflow with his deep and abiding peace.